The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
I'm going to do some introductions here real quickly. And I didn't tell these guys, but I don't read their bios. They were very impressive. I try to find something interesting on the internet about them. And this may or may not be true. Sometimes I just make stuff up. So, Zach, I think you're the CEO, Broad Street Financial, living out of Pennsylvania. And I got you as a college at Charleston graduate. We got Mark, the regional sales director at Empower, living in Pennsylvania. And I think you went to, I'm going to mispronounce the college, but Lay University, got your undergrad there. And I think you played football when you were in college back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
We got Cameron, AFG Broad Street Financial, still in Charleston, South Carolina, also a College of Charleston graduate, and looks like real active in the community, an athlete. So I think you did some cross country in high school. You looked fast. So I'm not sharing your times because you're faster than me, so I don't like you. And maybe now into some cycling. I saw a charity ride, cycling event fundraiser that you did, which I think is awesome. And then Jim, to close us out, partner, founder at Altium Wealth. You're a New York boy. It looked like college in New York, high school in New York. And one thing I saw that was interesting at Holy Cross, where you got your undergrad, I think it was economics and music. Music, what do you play an instrument?
I think that's a different Jim Dowling. I do play an instrument, ironically. I do play guitar, but I've been with Fidelity Investments. I'm a senior vice president at Fidelity for the last 26 years. I grew up outside of New York and New Jersey, but I currently live with my family in Washington, D.C.
Well, that's hilarious. I sometimes get this wrong. And I had
Just two of us. I've Googled that guy before. He seems very impressive, but
I know.
when I've Googled myself, he's popped up.
I had a picture too, and I was like, this does not look like that Jim. I think I have
He's way handsomer.
yeah, my unpaid intern is getting fired for that, but did some speaker research. All right. Well, Cam, please save me. I'm going to mute myself and let you guys start. Hit you with a few questions as we go along.
Sounds great. Thanks, Robert. Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Cameron. Like Robert mentioned, I'm part of a 401k advisory group along with Zach Golan. We're based in Charleston as well as Philadelphia, so I'm here locally. My office is Upper Peninsula area near the tech center. Today, we're just going to go over some really good information that you can take back to your office and your organizations to hopefully make your 401k or group retirement plan run smoother and more compliant than it may or may not be at this point. So there's ways that you can delegate certain roles and responsibilities to prudent experts. So we're going to have Jim with Fidelity talk a little bit about fiduciary roles and responsibilities. At that point, Mark will step in. He's with Empower to go over these pooled employer plans or PEPs. And then Zach on my team is going to go over how to run an effective 401k or 403b group retirement committee meeting. Zach?
Yeah, good morning. I was teasing with Robert. Typically, we like to start with a joke, but today we went the other way and are starting with some Department of Labor language. And so I always like to read these sentences before we kind of get a little bit deeper, because everything kind of starts with just these basic sentences from the DOL and kind of what the rest of the presentation will cover. But the duty to act prudently is one of the fiduciary central responsibilities under ERISA. It requires expertise in a variety of areas, such as investments. Lacking that expertise, a fiduciary will want to hire somebody with that professional knowledge to carry out the investment and other functions. Prudence focuses on the process. We label this presentation process for that reason. So again, prudence focuses on the process for making fiduciary decisions. Therefore, it is wise to document decisions and the basis for those decisions. So with that being said, we'll kick it over to Jim from Fidelity to start the presentation here.
Perfect. Zach, Robert, thanks for that great introduction. Zach, for inviting me here and coordinating. As I mentioned earlier, been with Fidelity for 26 years, spent most of my time working with advisors, consultants, and plan sponsors like yourself. Maybe I'll start from a big picture perspective of the trends that we're observing in the marketplace real time. Since 2008, my team has done a survey of heads of HR, CFOs, CEOs about what's top of mind or what's trends that are affecting their organizations, or what are they thinking about in relations to benefits, specifically retirement benefits. So we interview again about 1,150 people last year, so a broad array of companies, industries, sizes as well. And I'll share with you a couple of themes which I think will kind of lead into our discussion of fiduciary challenges and how to best mitigate those fiduciary challenges. One of the themes that we heard loud and clear, and I'm going to read it verbatim, it's from a CFO of a $100 million plan, a company with about 1,000 employees. And she said, staying compliant without losing my sanity, avoiding surprise audits, and figuring out how to make sense of all these ever-changing rules. Honestly, it's like reading a novel in another language. And she was describing her responsibility as trustee on the retirement plan. This industry seems to be the gift that keeps on giving with different rules and regulations. And quite candidly, the pace has increased dramatically. Perhaps terms like Secure 2.0 and potentially Secure 3.0 are coming down the pipeline. So that's kind of the first macro theme that we're hearing from folks sitting in positions like yourself, folks who are potentially trustees or managing retirement plans is, Jim, the speed of change has increased dramatically. I'm getting thrown a tremendous amount of different acronyms and things, and sometimes it becomes overwhelming. Excuse me. Second big macro theme that we're hearing from organizations across the country is there is a maniacally tight labor market right now. So the fight for talent, under a 4.5% unemployment rate is still real, specifically in certain geographic areas and geographic regions. So what we're hearing from folks like yourself and from organizations when they're thinking about retirement plans and benefits is the value of our employees. What we've heard from 2/3 of respondents is that we've hired a potential candidate within the last 18 months that we may not have considered 3 to 5 years ago. So there's a real focus across organizations on maintaining talent, satisfied employees, and making sure that you have best in class benefits, especially if you're competing in a very tight labor market, a very tight sector where you're going against other folks. And the last thing we hear loud and clear, which we're all aware of when we look at our own benefits costs, is the increasing benefits costs, right? Especially on the healthcare side and some of these other benefits. If inflation has been a little bit hotter than long term, certainly the increase in benefits cost on the healthcare side has been increased. So what we're hearing from organizations and folks like yourself is strategically thinking about how do we accomplish our strategic goals without having to write much larger checks year in and year out. I think when you kind of balance all that together, it kind of leads into one of the biggest trends that we've seen in our business over the last certainly 15 years, which is the intermediation of the business, or advisors kind of focusing on this business. We started to do the survey in 2008. I'd say roughly 56% of respondents were using a financial advisor consultant as a outside counsel for their plan. As we fast forward into last year, that number has gone up to 95%. And I think given what I mentioned, the complexity, the increased focus on employees, the strategic thinking about benefits, it's not surprising. The other trend, again, when Fidelity started this business, it was a direct business where we would sell directly to customers. Now, again, 95% of the business is through advisors. The other thing that we've seen there as well is the specialization or the focus of advisors who specialize in this business. If we go back 15 years ago, you had a lot of accommodative advisors who maybe would manage your wealth or whatever the case may be. Now we're seeing these advisors who have the scale, the expertise, who are really focusing on the space. So those are the big trends that we're seeing from that space. Digging down a click to fiduciary challenges, and again, I think it leads to why there's more advisors in the business, why more plans are leaning on advisors. They want that second set of eyes. They want those folks who can give them some outside expertise counsel to protect themselves and their organizations as trustees. The one takeaway I would say which depending on how large your plan are, I saw Daniel Aronowitz, who's he's the head of employee benefits, secretary administration. So basically he's the person in the Department of Labor who is responsible for retirement plans. And I would say big picture, the good news is he comes from a fiduciary insurance background, and he's got somewhat of a bullseye on plaintiffs' lawyers and the amount of lawsuits that have increased over the number of years. So I listened to him speak for roughly an hour. And his goal in the Department of Labor, who seems to have taken a stance where they want you to do right by your employees, right by clients, fiduciary responsibility, and all that sort of stuff. But they don't want to allow these kind of plaintiffs' attorneys to kind of pop up and do lawsuits that are potentially meaningless lawsuits to try to get some sort of settlement from that perspective. Taking it down a click as well, when you start to think about yourself acting as fiduciary for your trustee in the plan, they've laid it out pretty well. It's fairly wide, but the things that we have to think about are a couple basic things that I think all of us mostly probably think about if we're in a position of leadership as an organization thinking about our employees. The standards that you have to think about as a fiduciary in your retirement plan is first of loyalty. Are you acting in the best interest of plan participants with their exclusive purpose in mind? You're trying to provide the best benefits you can at a certain cost, right? But also defraying and being conscientious of the expenses that they're paying. Second thing you need to act with is with prudence. You have to have somewhat of a level of skill and diligence and be considered or consider yourself a prudent expert in the area, or maybe outsource and bring in the prudent expert. Diversification, you want to make sure that you have the options inside the plan. The laws are not super restrictive on the amount of investment options you need in the plan, but thinking about giving participants the diversification where they can balance a portfolio in different asset classes. Clearly, what we've seen over the last 15 years is a lot of the more assets are going to target date investments or managed account products where there is a level of diversification automatically in there. And then lastly, compliance with plan documents. If you have something in your document, your trust document, your investment management agreement, your investment policy statement, if it's in writing and it's in the document, you want to be sure that you're following that and making sure you're keeping up to speed on that. A lot of words here and a little bit of an eye chart, but I think some of the things that you want to think about from a best practice standpoint is really process. Having the committee structure in place, having the policies, having the operations, having the committee meetings. The other thing that we view as best practice as well, especially if you have new folks coming on to the committee, is fiduciary trainings. Getting the new folks up to speed. Joining one of these committees from a retirement plan can be a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of terminology and nomenclature, and we view it and we see advisors doing fiduciary training for new members of their committee. And then obviously leaning on outside counsel, outside experts when there is a need to do that. Strong fiduciary oversight, monitoring governance. What do we mean by this? It's a regular cadence, and we're not going to prescribe what that is, whether that's 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, but you really want to have a regular cadence that you're documenting, that you're reviewing both the investments that participants and employees are investing in, and then you're evaluating service providers as well. Not that you need the lowest cost fees in the marketplace at any point in time, but making sure the fees are valuable and having a process in place to do that from that perspective. And again, the last thing here would be prudent investment selection and monitoring protocols. If you have an investment policy statement, which we would recommend most folks do, making sure you're kind of following the considerations. If you say if X fund fails for X amount of quarters, we place it on watch, and X more quarters, we replace it. Please be sure that you're following what you're laying out in your documents as well. Qualified default investment alternatives, QDIAs. These are kind of target date funds or potentially managed accounts. Because we're seeing a tremendous amount of employee money going into target date funds, probably requires a little bit more of thought and in-depth research with you and your advisor to evaluate those on an ongoing basis, because again, they're making up the bulk of the assets for most employees. Review of available share classes for investment options. I'm certainly not legal counsel or anything like that. But what we have seen here is making sure that if you're offering an investment option, you're working with your committee, you're working with your advisor to make sure you're offering the lowest cost share class. If fund fund a share version is 1%, but there's a zero revenue version less than that, you may want to make sure that you're offering the best available option for your employees from that perspective. And then complying with 404C, which just is offering a diverse investment lineup. Again, we've got a pretty wide gamut right now. It's basically 3 diverse investment options. So you think like a money market stable value, maybe a bond fund and an equity fund. So the bar is fairly low from that perspective. But we do see generally best practices, a lot folks offering more options than that. And again, over the past 15 years, target dates garnering the vast amount of the flows, which provide immediate diversification for employees from that perspective. So I'll take a quick breath. I know I went through a lot on the big macro trends we're seeing, and then some of the best practices we see from a fiduciary standpoint.
Yeah, one question that's popping up is, and you covered some of this, but is there a point of emphasis right now with the DOL? Is there a most common process failure that they're going after?
I'll Mark's front lines on this and Zach as well. I would say it's probably timely remittance of salary deferrals into the retirement plan would be what I anecdotally hear, and I don't have any stats or statistics, but I know Mark and Zach are on the front lines as well. So I'd love to get what they think is kind of the hot button items right now.
Yeah, I
I
would.
agree. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's mostly on the compliance side of things. Exactly. Remittance is a big one. There's so many technology tools out there today to integrate is a huge push, 360 integration. Many payroll providers that historically wouldn't integrate are now integrating with a lot of different record keepers. These payroll providers, for example, that really were trying to sell proprietary record keeping systems are getting better and playing nicer in the sandbox, for these types of things. Top ERISA breach claims, the lowest cost share class, Jim kind of mentioned it just to kind of connect it. Monitoring fees and expenses, but I would say connecting that to having them being fair and reasonable for the services you're getting, not just bare bottom lowest cost. I think that's a common mistake that committees are making where they're not connecting it back to the services that they're getting. And just, simply monitoring the investments, monitoring your service provider. So monitoring fees, monitoring service provider, monitoring funds, I would say are our top 3.
Pull the string on something you just said, Zach. I'll open this up to the group. Jim mentioned valuable during his presentation. When we think of CFOs and when we're benchmarking fees, and you talked about fair and reasonable, how should we be thinking about this? And is it competitive versus defensible documentation? How often do we benchmark? Give me a little bit more about when we are as CFOs and participants on this committee, when we put our benchmarking hat, what are best practices?
Yeah, I think monitoring fees and expenses and benchmarking can be separated. Formal benchmarking and requests for proposals. Department of Labor says every 3 years is best practices. So if we're gonna solicit record keeper bids and take it to market, you want to make sure you've got your spreadsheet that shows the fees, but you also want to make sure, what's their cybersecurity policy. Companies like Empower and Fidelity have very different philosophies when it comes to how much they can invest to their technology and cyber and other resources than some of the fly-by-night smaller record keeper solutions. And so sometimes these digital providers from a pricing standpoint come in competitive, but we want to make sure we're also benchmarking those services. But that's every 3 years, soliciting record keeper bids. Although, in the last few, if we look at the last 5 years, you see the markets are up, flows are up. And so you can have a pricing that comes in at X at 20 million of assets, and now the plan is 30 million before you blink your eye because the markets have been doing so well. And so there might be justification to benchmark it even sooner than later. And then the second aspect of the fees isn't formal benchmarking, but just monitoring your fees. We're advisors, right? So monitoring the advisor fee. I would argue once a year, minimally, not waiting every 3 years to document a fee review. What are we paying our advisor? What are the services? Saving it in the fiduciary file, making sure we're documenting how much we're paying for all of our services, not just record keeping, advisory, administration, and investments. And in the investment world, collective investment trusts are gaining more traction than ever before, and you can have the same mutual fund, and then you can have its collective investment trusts, and you need a process that you're going through to say, hey, why are we paying more for this fund when the same manager offers this CIT? Did we go through this process? Are we, ultimately fulfilling our responsibility? Should we add the CIT or should we keep our fund, depending on pricing and what we value? So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, absolutely. One question, I'll hit you with two more rapid fire. One is some of us are using PEOs, and the 401k plan is administered through the PEO. And as CFOs of the operating company, can we wipe our hands clean of any sort of fiduciary responsibility? Are we still back in the game? Talk to me a little bit about that PEO relationship, if anybody's using one of those.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark. So the second part of our presentation is pooled employer plans, or PEPs. They're getting a lot of traction today, and a lot of PEOs, their products that they're offering are PEPs, and so it kind of connects to the PEO world. And just to set the stage, I would tell you, we're always acting in the best interest of plan participants, right? And so if we're going to go and we're going to select a PEO because our company believes the PEO is the best product, or the best solution for our employees, for health insurance, for HR, for all these services that the PEO offers, if you ever find yourself in trouble and you're in a lawsuit with a disgruntled employee and you said, well, how did you select the PEO retirement plan? You can't just say, well, because it was the best for our company. How was it the best for our employees, right? And so I think when we go back to, process on selecting that PEO for your 401k plan, again, it goes back to diligence. It goes back to process. What request for information? What request for proposal? How was this in the best interest of our plan participants? Always kind of looking it through that lens to justify why it was the best solution. And then, so that's high level. I'll kick it over to Mark. PEPs are very popular today. They changed the rules. It used to be, if as an employer, you were liable for all these other adopting employers. So nobody would want to get into bed with these employers they weren't connected with. And so they nobody really went down the pooled employer plan route. Now the rules changed. You're no longer liable for these other adopting employers, just yourself. And so PEPs are gaining a lot of traction. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mark from Empower to talk a little bit more about, I hope that's okay, Robert. Turn it over to Mark.
And Robert, we didn't plan this because the question kind of really leads into what I'm going to be discussing in the next 10 minutes or so. I guess the best way you could describe the difference between a PEO and a PEP is the PEO runs your benefits while the PEP runs your 401k plan. Okay, if you think about that. Okay, so from a fiduciary perspective, with the PEO, you still have fiduciary liability on the plan, right? Whereas the PEP, which were created in 2019 to replace what they call MEPs, MEPs, right? Those were replaced because with the MEP, you had to, you had what they call common nexus, right? You had between participant employers, there had to be some commonality. Also, with MEPs, there was what they called the bad apple rule, right? The bad apple rule is if somebody wasn't doing what they were supposed to in a MEP, and Jim brought this up earlier, with about contributions to the plan, it would disqualify the MEP. So they got rid of that with PEPs, pooled employer plans. And it was created really to give access to small mid-size employers to avoid 401k costs, to reduce costs and also reduce the complexity of the fiduciary roles and responsibilities that they would have in a 401k plan. Okay. So those are the key topics. What makes sense for PEPs today, okay, our number one is economics. Okay. It's administrative and an investment expense that sometimes plan sponsors may have when they have an audit, right? So what this does is it allows the employer who typically would pay for an audit of say $15, $20, $25, $30,000 a year and take that cost away when you have more than 100 employees in the plan, right? So that was one of the things that they were doing. But also from a fiduciary perspective, you have a plan that has under 100 employees. There's a lot of fiduciary roles and responsibilities that HR director or the CFO has to take in a 401k plan. What this is doing, it's taking that fiduciary responsibility away by getting into what we call a PPP, hiring a PPP, which is the pooled plan provider who is actually now the trustee of the 401k plan. And you as a company would be an adopter of that PEP. I know there's a lot of acronyms and it's 8:15 or 8:20 in the morning, right? But we're going to get through this, I promise you. Okay, we're going to try to make it as simple as possible. So what PEPs were doing, right? And then also simplify administration. So I will tell you this, Empower over the last 7 years, again, this is 7 years young now, the PEPs, they're not too old. We have now we have this year increased 2,000% over the last 4 years, PEPs inside of the Empower 401k record keeping system. We have now currently over 600 adopters this year alone going into PEPs with over $7 billion in assets. We thought this was going to be more on a small plan play where you have less than 100 employees. We're finding plan sponsors with 20, 50, 100, $200 million going into PEPs today because of the savings in time, the HR director, anywhere from 20 to 50 hours a year, just in administration savings, hours of administration savings. And if you have an audit, we're looking at another 20 to 40 hours in savings and time for that HR director or the CFO just in the audit. So again, it's an administrative play also. And then also it improves access. So it enables small employers to offer competitive retirement benefits, right? So again, it's scalable. The other thing that you have to understand from a record keeping perspective is that plan design are flexible. Even though you're an adopter of a 401k plan today, okay, you still have the flexibility of customizing your plan design. It doesn't have to be one way. All right. So again, it provides flexibility also. All right. So what I'm going to go through real quick are some of the players involved, and keep this in the back of your head when you're going through this, is that you do not have to worry about hiring any of these individuals except for Zach and Cam, who are the main instrumental people involved in getting the right PEP to you. And then have Empower do all the due diligence behind the scene when it comes to the record keeping, the PPP, who again, as you can see here, is the plan administrator of the plan. The 338 is being hired as the fiduciary on the investments. That's the one commonality of all of the adopters, is that you're going to have one simplified lineup. Zach and Cam's role is to come and communicate those funds to you and to your employees. The 316 is also what we call the plan administrator. That is also under the PEP. Okay. So their administrative duties is day to day. So they're taking the fiduciary burden off you when it comes to the plan itself. The 338 is more about the investment fiduciary. If you have a third-party administrator, we can incorporate those individuals inside the plan to do the 5,500 testing, compliance work, okay, that person can also be involved if need be. Or it could be a bundled situation where Empower is doing both the record keeping and the administration, right? And then the trustees obviously are the PPP. So the PPP is really taking that fiduciary burden off of the plan sponsor. We've done studies and we're seeing an 80 to 100% less work an HR or CFO does in administration when they're in a PEP. 80 to 100%. Some years they have to do nothing. Some years they may have to submit some census information for the audit, but that's it.
I'll just say, I mean, there's companies, I was mentioning technology. I mean, there's a company called Finch and others that talk about, they still need the census, right? They still need the employer census. The employer still needs to upload something. Finch is a technology that record keepers and administrators they're pulling that directly from your payroll. So again, to Mark's point, it can be hands off in today's world pretty heavily up to that 100% if you've got all the right technology in place to pull everything that you need.
Right. And when it comes to payroll, Robert, we have the ability to link with over 250 national payroll firms to allow us to integrate seamlessly between a 360. So again, one of the key issues that we find with a lot of I just talked to an advisor the other day. The plan sponsor was deducting payroll from payroll for 7 months and was not taking that money and depositing it into employees' accounts. So there's issues there. What this payroll bridge does, it allows us to accept the payroll file directly from the payroll vendor, let's say Paylocity, for instance. And then when somebody goes online to make a deferral change or a loan or applies for a loan, that feed will then go to Paylocity. So there's really nothing the plan sponsor would have to do at that point other than just be notified that, Jane Smith took a loan out for $5,000 and this is the payment structure. So again, the whole purpose of these PEPs is a fiduciary play that wants an HR or a CFO to take away the fiduciary liability of the plan and the roles and responsibilities. And there's a lot of other responsibilities that you guys have on your plate. So one of the reasons why the PEPs were established were to take those off your plate. So with that, I have any questions?
I do. I've got a bunch. Okay. Number one is talk to us a little bit about cost and time and dollars to enter and exit a PEP. Is it frictionless, in and out, easy peasy? Is it quite a production to get in and out? So choose wisely. Talk to me a little bit about the in and out of this PEP situation.
So from an in and out perspective, you would actually, it's very similar to like a PEO where you would be able to leave as an adopter of that PEP, right? So if the company is sold, right? If they merge with another firm and they have another 401k plan, they have the opportunity to leave that PEP. From an Empower perspective, there's no cost to leave the plan. So from that perspective, you would most likely probably have to go through a 90-day. So from a time commitment perspective, a 90-day conversion to leave the PEP over to go to a single employer plan or another PEO or another PEP per se. So from a cost perspective, minimal from Empower's perspective, but from a time perspective, it's about 90 days.
Yeah, and I'll just add, PEPs have hit the market in full force over the last few years. And so from an experience standpoint, I don't have a ton of experience on leaving PEPs, but we've moved, we represent hundreds of plans and we've moved a dozen plus to PEPs over the course of it. And they're not perfect for everybody. They are significantly easier to go from a standalone plan than to a PEP. You're adopting this larger plan. It's a couple of pages of information from a plan design, and they can be pretty flexible from a design standpoint. A common thought is, well, how limiting is this PEP I've got a safe harbor plan, my weighting, my eligibility. Is it all going to fit in? I want to keep my design the same. And 9 times out of 10, you can. They're pretty flexible from a design standpoint. But I would argue they've been super easy to move into. I think they'll be a little more difficult to move out of, if you want to know the truth. Because if you're moving to a standalone, if you're moving to another PEP, I think it'll be somewhat seamless. A lot of the PEPs, the way they're designed, is you've got your own website. You still have data on like your plan health reports and contribution limits. They're still monitoring it as an individual adopting employer. So the record keeping's still there. But then going to establish your own standalone plan, I bet there's going to be some more complication to move out. But it's still new.
Getting some questions from the members, and I'll call it like sort of the spectrum of control versus like maybe risk averse. They see the PEP and they're like, but I have a loss of control. Some of us CFOs love these meetings and we're like, oh, I can't wait to talk about plan design. And then the others are like, oh, 338s are good, but PEP sounds even better. So talk to me a little bit about the spectrum of control, and for the CFOs in the room, who might be half and half here. Like, how do we think about who's this a good fit for?
Yeah. And so it's a great question. You are giving up control. For example, your PPP or pool plan provider, they're in control. You're responsible to monitor them and make sure they're doing a good job. And not all PEPs are created equal. We love our partners on this call today, Empower and Fidelity, but there are a lot of every provider out there these days has a PEP. They've created one, and you have to be a little careful. We see some of these pool plan providers, they've got the 338 there's some relationship with. We would say it's not fully independent. Maybe the administration, there's some relationship with. Their job is to hire and fire these parties. And when you see conflicts of interest, and there are out there with these PEPs, you have to be careful. But for example, the 338, the PPP is hiring the 338. And if they hire a 338, now you can be pretty flexible. You can say, Zach, I want a low cost index fund lineup. And you go find a PEP that has a 338 with that lens. But from there, if you said, well, now I want to layer in this fund or that private equity or private credit, cryptocurrency, these are all things that are being discussed in plans today. You don't have that ability to just, like you would if you had a standalone and you had complete control and you were taking on that responsibility. It's your PPP that's really responsible for these decisions. And so now we've got to go in and fire our PPP if we want to make adjustments. So you're certainly giving up control with these PEPs. I would argue mostly on who you're hiring as your fiduciaries and your providers. On plan design, I would tell you, if you have a prototype document, you're going to be fine. You still have a lot of flexibility with design. If you have something very custom, you have to be careful.
Yeah, and just to add to what Zach's saying about flexibility, not ever, like as Zach mentioned, not all record keepers are the same. What we found is we found clients asking us about plan design, right? So from a control perspective, there's some record keepers that you have to, again, look at the record keeper are not allowing you to customize plan designs. Reason being is it's more of a capability issue, whereas we could do with Empower is that we have the ability to be a little bit more streamlined and customize the document to an effect with certain rules and regulations, but allow the plan to have, maybe there's a Roth contribution, or maybe there's one loan available or multiple loans available. Vesting, for instance, can be customized. So there are some customization tools, but again, like Zach mentioned, you got to be careful as to what PEP you go into and who's offering those PEPs.
That's good. We got 5 more questions. I'm going to hold till the end. I'm going to let you guys keep going, and then I'll hit you rapid fire.
Great.
And I just want to add one more comment on PEPs. It's just from a fee perspective. I think there's this common misconception out there that, and Mark alluded to, from a service standpoint, I think that's where the driving factor is, reducing the administration on your infrastructure, on your HR and CFO folks, finance folks who are running these plans. From a fee perspective, the misconception is, well, I'm adopting this larger plan. Isn't, the power of, the law of large numbers says, wouldn't it be lower cost? And from what we're seeing, not necessarily, for what it's worth. And so when you look at a standalone, depending on your demographic and your size, not necessarily. All right. So.
Yeah, I'm just going to take 30 seconds here. My name again is Cam. I'm an extension of Zach and Broad Street Affluence Financial Group. Zach has been in the business of supporting small business retirement plans for over 20 years now. Our team supports 250 plus plans ranging from startups to 1,000 employee groups. A little bit about his accolades. He was recently just named one of the top retirement plan advisors. A few years ago, he was recognized as 40 under 40. Again, we have offices down here in Charleston and Philadelphia, but we support plans all over the U.S. And this wasn't on here, but I will just say, Zach and our team, we are very responsive. So one of the gripes we hear a lot about certain plan advisors is that they haven't heard back from them in weeks, days, months, years. We don't miss emails. We get back in a timely manner, and we work with all the top record keepers, Empower, Fidelity, ADP, Paychex, Principal, these groups that partner with advisors, and we can really run a meeting effectively. And Zach will just get into sort of what that looks like from a committee standpoint.
Yeah, and so a lot of this content on this document we've chatted about already. But I think that I think if you can nail the committee meeting, you're doing it right. If the title of this presentation is process, and if you can run an effective committee meeting from a process standpoint, everything else will kind of fall underneath. I will say the NAPA, National Association of Plan Advisor 40 under 40 award was many years ago at this point. But with that being said, I'm just I really put together this document on how to run an effective committee meeting. There's 10 steps. I don't want to forget to say the final slide at the end. We're gonna, happy to send out sample committee charter, investment policy statement, sample investment policy statement, sample meeting minutes, as well as this document for anyone who's interested from a process standpoint. But I'm going to cruise through this and off we go. So first is establish the committee structure. Define roles and responsibilities up front. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we're chatting with plan sponsors where they don't have a charter on file and they haven't formally set up the committee. They might even have a committee that's meeting, but no documentation on what the scope is and roles and responsibilities, who's a part of it. And it's often dated. The committee is turned over. I think Jim alluded to this, and it has not been updated. So establishing that committee, taking a step back, identifying the members. It's often HR, CFO, finance, even ownership. And then Jim mentioned 95% of plans these days have delegated some of the responsibilities to an independent advisor. And it used to be 50% not too long ago. And so you're starting to see committees following DOL guidance to say, are we really prudent experts? And if not, should we bring on somebody who is? Assign somebody to take those meeting minutes. That's often the advisory team with AI and Zox and all these other good tools. It's making this a lot easier, but still compiling it based on guidance is good. And clarifying who's actually a fiduciary. We'll come in and we'll see some folks on the committee, rightfully so, aren't formally a fiduciary. And then we'll see some advisors that are not formally signed on as a 321 or 338. And so just making sure you understand the true status. I mentioned the committee charter. Having that documentation is key. It's one of the top documents we're asking for when we're reviewing plans. Setting a consistent meeting cadence, the industry standards quarterly, plans, you're seeing a lot of stuff trickle down, meaning it used to be $100 million plan plus, that's where advisors like myself were focusing. And now it's really coming down to 30 million, even below that. And I bring up size of plans because I think at 30 million or more, certainly quarterly are justified. If you're an ultra small plan, I think you can get away with annually if you don't have the infrastructure, but at least once a year. But setting this cadence is important. Also, you're gonna have ad hoc meetings, meaning if you're benchmarking your plan, these provider proposals, they're going to no longer be good. They're going to become dated. You might need to have a follow-up meeting, within a month or two to actually vote and make a decision after you've gotten the RFI, RFP, and done the due diligence. Build a repeatable agenda. We call ours a service plan. We know we're not going to solve all the world's problems in one meeting. And so over 12 to 24 months, we're prioritizing and documenting when we're going to cover what. Even if we're not getting to it today, it's documented somewhere. These are some core agenda items. Plan health review. You don't need to do this quarterly. You're not going to move the needle on participant rates necessarily on a quarterly basis, but on an annualized basis, if you're not looking at how are our employees doing, we can talk about funds and fees all day long, but if your employees don't have the right funding adequacy and they're not on track to retire with dignity, this whole thing's not working. And so looking, the plan health report at least once a year, having some KPIs and putting some responsibility on the folks that own employee engagement, plan design to ultimately get us to where we need to go, which is helping our employees make smart financial decisions and be ready for retirement. Investment review, this is done quarterly for sure. Even if you're meeting annually, all these tools today are generating reports quarterly to monitor funds. And so this should be checked on and at least a 5-minute time slot in every agenda, even if everything's passing the methodology. I mentioned earlier, under this administration, there's so much to review on the investment side of things. Private equity, Bitcoin, CIT. So, there's no shortage of content to cover. Fee review, we kind of chatted about this earlier. I think once a year, you should document your fees and are they fair and reasonable for the services you're getting compared to your peers in the industry. Not necessarily formal benchmarking. That, again, can be done every 3 years. Compliance, fiduciary, we just got through testing season. For those of you who, congratulations, always fun. But this it's worth noting in Q2 to just kind of cover it, make sure there's no problems so that we really don't have problems if we miss anything in the future. Employee engagement, this could be a non-fiduciary item that I think needs to be discussed. The CFOs, it might not be in your wheelhouse, but your HR counterparts, they're the ones that are going to say, hey, we got to help our employees. We got to be a resource for them. And an industry trend is these financial wellness initiatives. It's not just on the 401k. It's not just about Roth versus traditional and investments and how much to save for retirement. There's a huge problem with folks not being able to save at all. And so budgeting, emergency fund, debt management, and then for folks that are in the C-suite, estate planning, there are other things. There's only so much money to go around. It's all connected, and you're starting to have those conversations. Lastly, provider issues, record keeper services. We love our record keepers, but the world changes and things move, and there inevitably are issues, and just kind of having that conversation, bringing those record keeper partners into your committee meeting and making sure you're resolving them as quickly as possible. All right, now we're going to go super fast here because I'm on 4 and we want to leave some more time here. So document everything, process, but document. If you're not putting it in writing in a fiduciary file, it did not exist. And so making sure, again, charter, policy statement, meeting minutes, those are critical. The investment policy statement specifically, this is the backbone. You want to make sure. To be fair, when we ask for documents, I see investment policy statements on file, but not necessarily meeting minutes and not necessarily charters to establish. So we see this a lot, but they're often dated, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so just keeping it up to speed, especially with the environment that we're in today. Benchmark regularly. Especially companies that are with a PEO or are with their payroll providers 401k plan, they're not moving. Everything's integrated. You still need a process to benchmark your plan and justify why you're there. And so those are the ones where we're chatting with, say, hey, when was the last time you shopped it around? They say, Zach, we love our PEO. We're not carving out, we're not making, we say we get it, but you still need a process to monitor that. You still need to monitor your service providers. And let's go and formally go through that process. Leverage expert support. This is that prudent expert. Most plans are starting to get with the times. Even though the CFO is the smartest guy or gal in the room, they're starting to realize, hey, we'll delegate this responsibility to somebody who does this as their day job. We're trying to grow our company for whatever the reason, external sale or whatever the key rocks are in your organization. The 401k is critical, of course. But delegating these responsibilities to somebody, has been a huge industry trend, specifically the advisory role. Focus on participant outcomes. Again, a lot of committees get in the weeds on their fiduciary responsibility and don't stay focused on that the real importance of the employee being able to retire. Jim mentioned this training. You don't know what you don't know. And so I think on an annualized basis, once a year as part of your committee meeting, there needs to be some training. I mean, in the mergers and acquisition space today, it's super popular. What do I need to know when we're buying a company as it relates to its 401k? Is something in the weeds that there are great trainings on as far as making sure you're not buying a company with a red flag 401k. And then lastly, maintaining that fiduciary file, making sure that it's clean, easy. I remember, 7 years ago, auditors were not asking for meeting minutes. Now they are. They are documenting, if your plan is an audited plan, they're going to want some basic documentation, but maintaining that fiduciary file is key component. Again, if you're doing all this right, having an organized electronic file is easy. All right, so I'll pause there, and we've got 5 minutes left for questions.
That was awesome. And you hit 2 or 3 of the remaining questions. So good job. I'm going to hit you with the rest. And we're going to go all over the place. So everybody's welcome to chime in and answer. First question is kind of going the way back machine. And it popped up around design and investment selection. And it's around share classes. And the question is how to think about selecting within share classes an R2, R4 that get to offset some plan costs versus an R6 that is like kind of a cleaner, sometimes lower cost expense structure. Talk to me a little bit how we should think about share classes.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Again, that lowest cost share class, is been defined as a top ERISA breach claim. And so we believe best practices just using that lowest cost share class, that R6 share, and going to a zero revenue, it just makes it easier to justify in our opinion. Meaning, if you're using that revenue sharing share class that's sharing revenue to the record keeper, to the advisor, there's 12B1 fees, and oftentimes that could be considered a commission and not a fee. And that can muddy the waters when it comes to the services you're getting. And a pure fiduciary advisor can't receive a commission. It has to be on a fee-based solution. And so, and you've got conflicts of interest. So for example, American funds is probably where you're referencing R2, 3, 4, 6. They have R1 through R6 share classes. Most providers don't have so many. And so American funds, you'd say, all right, well, I'm using the R2 share, which has 75 basis points for advisor compensation built into that share class. Vanguard has no compensation. So the advisor has a potential conflict of interest to use that R2 share from American funds versus a separate fund family. Now, if you're using the R6 share class, there's no revenue built in for the advisor. So now there's no conflict of interest. If Vanguard, who doesn't have 12B1 fees in any of their funds, is the better fit fund family for your employees based on that fund, based on the methodology you're using, based on your investment policy statement, there's no conflict of interest for the advisor to pick American funds because there's revenue built in for compensation. So I just think it's a conflict of interest discussion, and going to the R6, and then it's clear and transparent, meaning the fund charges X, the advisor charges Y. I know exactly what everyone's getting paid. It's not bundled in the mutual fund expense ratio. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Perfect. I got a KPI question. Let's pivoting away from expenses and costs, but more to we talk about. I'd include maybe these are CFO or we what metrics should we be looking at to plan to see if we are doing well with retirement wellness, retirement readiness, our employee engagement. Is it participation? Is it deferral rates? Is it amount of loans? What are 2 or 3 KPIs CFOs need to be looking at on a regular basis to take the pulse of our employees?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are some apps out there that really look at financial wellness as a whole. So record keeping health reports are only looking at your 401k. So just to separate those two. But yeah, when you're just looking at the 401k, it's tricky because they don't have all the data. They don't know what people saved in the past. But yeah, participation rates and account balances are what we're looking at. But there are some really good tools out there to understand how your employees are holistically with their basic finance, finance 101. And so you can do some assessments of your group outside of your 401k. And there's some really good KPIs there that we're looking at outside the 401k. But I do like account balance. I do like participation rates. Account balance is probably the biggest one, just to see if people are on track based on their compensation.
Mark gets the last question because I got this like 5 times from people. They're furious that I did not ask you what position you played in football in college. And so I have to get this out of the way so I'm not kicked out.
I was a guard my freshman year and tackle my sophomore year. So I played guard. I played offensive line.
Nice.
I was
Well,
the meathead.
hey,
Yes.
Guarded the water cooler, or you actually played?
I played a little bit. Yeah. Mhm.
Mark looks like he can play. Cam, you look like a runner. All right.
That's
And
right.
yeah. Well, this was fantastic, guys. We're at time, so I got to call it. I love it. I got a ton of notes here around the importance and growing and always important of governance and documentation, process. Huge fan of retirement readiness. I'm convinced that it's very expensive for your employees not to be ready to retire. Especially, I got a lot of managers and senior leadership that really would like to be retired 5 years ago, and they're super expensive and they're not crushing it at work anymore. And so I'm waiting for a research paper on the cost of senior managers not being ready to retire. So this is important and top of mind. And if you're thinking, my goodness, my partner that I have in this space is not bringing this kind of horsepower that Cam and Zach and Jim and Mark brought, I'm going to share contact information. As they said, it's if it's been 3 and 5 and 10 years forever since your company has, I call them broker beauty shows, had another partner come out and take a look at your plan, this might be the time. There are wild ranges in tools and talent and training, and clearly Cam and Zach and Jim and Mark are bringing high level of stuff. So thank you all. This was fantastic. I really appreciate you bringing this material to us today.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.